over to Kush for that introduction.
Great, thanks, Emily. Yeah, I think most folks probably know of E3, but you might not know exactly kind of what E3 has been doing across the industry, especially within California, but kind of throughout North America. We're about 130 plus consultants strong now, have multiple offices throughout kind of the US as well as in Canada. And I think what's a little bit unique about us is, most folks might know us from more of our public sector work, working with utilities or public agencies like the CPUC and the CEC here in California, doing things like grid of the future studies, retail rate design, things of that nature. But we also do a lot of work with developers, investors, more commercial clients. And I think here's just a couple of examples. That's more focused on work looking at different types of assets. We do a lot of work with investors, financiers, et cetera. And I think something in particular, we've been focused on storage for quite a long time. So we were involved with the first kind of battery project that was ever project financed in the world, which was in Southern California back in 2016. And since then have really being kind of at the forefront of this topic as much as any consultant can, who's actually not in the ground, obviously building these facilities. And I think we try to take a balanced view of both the need and opportunity of energy storage in particular, but also, try to be as fundamental as possible in terms of how it fits into kind of the longer term future of California in particular, but also in other jurisdictions. So just wanted to kind of provide that high level context and color of the work that we've been doing, which really at this point is kind of 8+ years in terms of really, getting on the ground in terms of supporting development and, really analyzing the kind of costs and benefits as well as revenue potential of probably every type of storage asset that's kind of out there or even contemplated. So again, really looking forward to this discussion. And I think it might be worth kind of mentioning, we have kind of a number of different services and products around storage. So I'll make this brief as a timeshare, pitch for the rest of the conversation, which will be much more exciting. But we do a lot of work helping with due diligence, like I said, transaction support, strategy. We have a whole host of kind of price forecasting services. Looking at kind of all of the potential revenue streams that a battery can earn, kind of now and into the future, as well as doing a lot of, public analysis, right? And here's two kind of notable ones that I myself am personally involved with, looking at storage both in kind of New York and Massachusetts. So I think that gives us kind of again, a pretty good perspective on just, how a utility, how a, state policymaker, and how kind of an individual asset or owner of a portfolio or company, that's developing storage would be thinking about this, which I think is pretty critical and important, given how dynamic storage is and how much, the revenue profile and what it's doing day to day could change over, 15, 20, 30-year horizon, which we'll get into in the next couple of minutes.
Great, thanks, Kush. Next, I'll jump into some of the exciting storage market trends we've been seeing in California in the past few years. First, really wanted to start with the solar and storage builds. These graphs, or the graph on the left shows the cumulative capacity in gigawatts of solar in yellow and batteries in purple. And as you can see from 2018, there has been a really significant increase in both solar and storage builds. We went from practically 0 gigawatts in 2018 of storage to over 7 gigawatts this year to date. And on the right-hand side, you can see not only has this growth exploded, really driven by California state clean energy targets, as well as state reliability needs, the ratio between solar and storage builds is super interesting. So on the right, you can see solar builds are pretty unprecedented and large and impressive, and storage was able to really catch up in 2021 to build huge amounts of it, kind of for 3 to 4 years in a row now. And the impact of solar and storage on energy prices is really important for the value that storage can make in the market. So next we'll talk about kind of the impact these builds and increase in builds in the last few years have had on energy prices. So with the increased build of solar, we've seen that during midday solar hours, prices decrease and become kind of significantly negative. This chart is showing the average SP15 or Southern California day ahead energy price in the month of May for the past 4 years. So in light blue, you can see further historical years having kind of higher total energy price values. You can see the duck curve kind of prominent in every year. But as we move forward in time, and the blue lines become darker. You can see that in 2024 May alone, just a few months ago, we saw kind of some record negative prices midday, and increased frequency of those negative prices. And the reason this is really important is because one of the core drivers of storage market value is charging when these prices are low during the middle of the day and discharging when prices are high, in these evening hours around hour 18, 19, 20, when load significantly increases and solar is going offline in California. So how we expect storage to react, as I just alluded to, has evolved over time. This chart is a little bit complicated, but I'll spend a little bit of time on it because it's really important. When batteries were first built around 2018 to 2020 and really started operating in earnest in California, you can see that they're having a very small kind of total megawatt hour generation profile, which the axis is on the left-hand side, because they're mainly focused on providing regulation and ancillary service. But as more storage was built, you can see in 2021 and 2022, you start to observe their charging behavior occurring. This is an example day for each of these years, the first day in August. You can see them charging between 8 and 10 a.m. and then discharging between hours 17 and 22. And in year 2023, this trend becomes even more prominent. So you can see kind of a major impact from storage, charging midday and then discharging in the evening to help meet load. And how we think about energy arbitrage revenue related to this is really what's the price when storage is charging in midday and what's the price when storage is discharging, and how will this price change over time as more storage and different resources come onto the system. And one of the metrics we use to measure the potential difference between these prices is called the spread, which is just the difference between the discharging price and the charging price. It's very similar to kind of a top-bottom analysis calculation where we think about, for example, for a 4-hour battery, what are the 4 highest priced hours in the day and the 4 lowest priced hours in the day that we assume a battery could capture to kind of provide like a perfect theoretical energy revenue benchmark. So that's what I'm showing here in this next slide. On the left chart, the annual average of this daily 4-hour spread that I just described has increased over time. So you can see it was like fairly low in 2018 to 2020. We saw it start to slowly increase, and then kind of a record year in 2022 when we had a number of different input shock that you'll see throughout the presentation. We had extremely high gas prices as well as extreme weather here in California. But we saw this kind of annual average spread increase over time. And if we break this down to kind of a monthly average basis, you can see some further seasonality to it. Highlighted in red are peaks in summer months, and highlighted in blue are peaks in winter months.
I think this is in kind of teasing out this trend and some of the fundamental drivers that we see in the market. I know shortly we'll talk about real-time versus day-ahead energy arbitrage opportunities. Had a question come in that might be worth spending just a moment on for everyone,
Sure.
Which is regarding the fundamental forces of why we're seeing such deeper negative pricing occur in midday during solar overgeneration hours. So, in brief, there's a question of is this driven by levels of curtailment that are much higher and much deeper, and that's causing bids to adjust, or is this really more due to REC pricing and REC supply demand dynamics? The short answer is both, and yet the second factor I would say is probably a more significant driver, i.e. REC prices and a compliance tightening in the supply market of RECs relative to the compliance periods of LSEs. And that's in part when we looked at historical curtailment that we've been tracking very closely in California in the springtime, we've seen that year-to-date curtailment is higher, but it's not night and day higher than it has been in years past. There is a gradual sort of increase in the curtailment trend, and a lot of that curtailment is happening more at local solar congested nodes as well in the network. But that factor of moderately higher curtailment in combination with a tightening REC supply is really what's driving a change in bid behavior in our view. And that's obviously very fundamental importance here as we think about energy arbitrage opportunities. What you've highlighted here from the brief history as we go into the real-time market dynamic is that historically the high highs have still been the dominant drivers of that arbitrage opportunity, but increasingly we think the low lows may be a critical stable component of energy arbitrage value in the future.
Great, thanks, Nate. Yeah, really helpful addition, and thanks for the question. So as Nate alluded to, in addition to looking at the day-ahead energy market, we also look at the real-time energy market when we think about energy arbitrage revenue potential for storage. So in this chart, we are keeping the same chart we just highlighted with the monthly seasonality, but have added a red 15-minute real-time line to the chart. So you can see that in 2018 to 2020, real-time spreads were consistently higher than day-ahead spreads, but as more batteries have been added to the system, we've seen the average spreads kind of collapse together, which makes sense because it's kind of the name of the game for storage to smooth out those prices when they're charging when they're low and discharging when they're high, which is really flattening everything. So you can see in years 2022 to 2023, save some extreme weather months, the spreads have become much closer together, even with day ahead peaking above real time in some months. And on the bottom, you can see this annual average 4-hour spread over time, really summarized very clearly, where 2018 and 2019, the real-time average spread was higher. They came way closer together in 2020, 2021. We saw some unique dynamics in 2022, and again, they're very similar in 2023. And if this is true for the 15-minute market, it's also especially true for the 5-minute real-time market, which is an especially small imbalance market in terms of the number of gigawatts needed to supply. So in this chart, we just wanted to show that for the 5-minute real-time energy arbitrage potential, it's also trending down. And this adds the complexity of battery duration. So we're showing arbitrage value in the same dollar per megawatt hour on the axis, just for each of the past 5 years, ranging from short duration to longer duration of 4-hour storage. And we're seeing that the value created is collapsing between duration, which suggests that the difference between the best discharge hour and lowest charging hour is getting closer to the best 4 hours and best 4 hours to discharge and best 4 hours to charge. Further suggesting that the increase in battery builds is really bringing those prices closer together. And in addition to looking at the day ahead and real-time markets, we also think about ancillary services revenues. In the past, ancillary services had made up a significant portion of revenues for batteries. Nowadays, we've seen a significant price saturation for different products. So an example is just for regulation up. Here, I'll kind of walk through this chart since it's not intuitive, but we're plotting on the x-axis the energy price. Every dot represents an hour pair in each year. So this is every hour of the year plotted. And then the y-axis is the regulation up price in the same hour. So in 2021 and previous years, the trend we saw is that as energy prices get higher, we also expect regulation up prices to get higher in general. But as more batteries come online to the system, we see a depression of these prices in high-priced hours. And this is because the energy market is always an opportunity cost to those assets providing regulation up. And any upward AS like regulation up, spin, or non-spin, they're online and they're running. So the opportunity cost to instead discharge energy and not be paid to hold back is a strong one. So we would expect kind of a strong upward correlation. And because batteries really care about the spread, they're willing to sit and do regulation for a much lower price when the energy price is high, compared to a gas plant that cares about the actual magnitude of the energy price. Batteries care about the difference in energy price in their cycle, not the overall level, right? So we've seen this kind of depression of regulation prices as more batteries are installed into the system.
That's right. And just chiming in to Emily's narrative here, what makes batteries different from generators is really that they are generation limited. And because they're generation limited, their opportunity cost is limited because at some threshold exceeding their short run marginal cost, you count it, the battery can only discharge up to its state of charge. So if it's got 4 hours in the tank, it can discharge, its rated nameplate by 4 hours. So the energy price might be high the other 12 hours, if there's 16 hours outside of that window. And yet a battery will, as Emily said, not have anything else to do with its SOC except to provide, regulation up service, assuming it can manage the charge requirement to do so. And so because it's offering into the market at prices that are good for a gas generator to want to generate, but bad for a battery to want to use its limited SOC in that window versus a higher priced hour, that's why we see this kind of depression on the top right hand side of the scatter. And you'll see a different dynamic as we talk about regulation down, which has sort of the opposite profile right here. So I'll turn it back to Emily to kind of take us through what we see happening.
Yeah, sounds good. So as you can see throughout the years, we're seeing the same effect where an increased battery storage build later in years collapses regulation down prices. However, the trend is reversed since regulation down prices were historically high when energy prices were low. However, batteries are perfectly happy to charge when energy prices are low and provide regulation down, which is following the regulation signal on a charging basis. So you see those prices really start to collapse. And the importance of this AS price saturation is to suggest that over time, we expect energy arbitrage to become a more important component of storage revenues than ancillary services. So to test that, we wanted to show some public data from historical battery storage revenues in CAISO. So this chart is showing 9 battery energy storage systems, revenues for 2022 and 2023, just anonymized as number 1 through 9, annual revenues in dollars per kilowatt year. So as you can see, there's really wide variability in revenues from asset to asset, with a range of kind of 3 times between the lowest and highest earning assets in 2023. And the average annual revenues in 2022 were about $230 per kilowatt year, and they fell to $190 per kilowatt year in 2023, which we've kind of been showing this trend in previous charts, but this is driven by the lower energy plus AS values as gas prices fell and stabilized in 2023. An additional kind of striking observation here is just how much the proportion of energy AS and capacity differs by BESS asset. It's just really interesting to see different kind of revenue strategies, bidding strategies, contractual obligations that inform different revenues. And, every team wants their project to be best number 1 with the highest revenues. Normalized, but in reality, it takes a lot of different strategic decisions and careful forecasting to make sure that your project can have a winning strategy.
I'm also just chime in here for the sake of our audience who's very deeply plugged into this market, that these best labels of 1 to 9 are in no way a ranking of specific assets in the market. These are just, randomly anonymized batteries that we pulled this information, historical revenue capture from the FERC EQR data. So this is tagged to individual assets in the market. We just numbered them 1 through 9, and this is not a full view of every single asset that's operating, but these were assets that have been online for at least the full year of each of these past 2 historical years for the sake of some comparison metrics.
Yep, that's right. No preference towards different BESS. We treat all BESS equally. Sounds good. Well, that's a good transition into our next section. As we've kind of demonstrated related to the CAISO storage market trends, you can see that the CAISO market is really evolving rapidly. Not only do we have multiple changes on the supply side that we briefly discussed with major increases in solar and storage builds, we also have major changes on the load side and demand as we electrify buildings and transportation and have major new loads for the first time kind of in a multiple decades with the increase of data center needs. And this is really changing kind of the market prices that are the basis for storage revenues. So as these fundamental market shifts occur, we really need fundamentals-based market price forecasting to feed into a reliable storage revenue forecasting methodology. And that's where Restore comes in. So a brief Restore model introduction is that it's a price taker dispatch optimization model with perfect foresight. The fact that it's a price taker means that we assume the asset that we're modeling takes prices as an input and doesn't have any influence on the prices that are fed into it. It has perfect foresight, which means it can see the hourly data we feed into it to be able to make optimization decisions on different value streams. And one of the strengths of Restore is that it is really flexible, which is important when we're talking about a technology like battery storage, which is still not fully mature. We can't accurately predict the exact costs or operations of storage, even 5 to 10 years out, like we can other technologies. But battery storage is still evolving, which is why it's exciting to be able to capture its evolution in Restore. Not only that, Restore is capable of modeling a lot of different technologies and kind of customized value streams. We won't focus on these today, but I just wanted to give this audience kind of some exposure and knowledge that we've used Restore to evaluate different energy efficiency programs and measures. It was built as a public tool, even starting in the late 90s by the CEC and E3 to evaluate solar plus storage behind the meter. So that there is a public, smaller version of Restore on the CEC website. Restore can also evaluate customer-cited technologies like smart water heaters and smart HVAC. In addition, we can evaluate managed EV charging. We've done some really interesting studies on the value of V2G as well, looking at how EVs can interact with behind-the-meter solar and storage or microgrids. And then we have also looked at fossil generators in Restore and the ability of storage or fuel cells to replace different fossil generators. So the front-of-the-meter storage revenue forecasting that we'll focus on today is just one specific application of the Restore model. And we're really capable of looking at a number of different applications if that suits your needs. So honing in on kind of the storage revenue forecasting piece of Restore, our core inputs are the day-ahead or real-time energy prices, ancillary service prices, and then we also layer on capacity revenues. So our goal is to maximize net storage revenues of a specific asset subject to different technology operating constraints, such as round-trip efficiency or cycling limits, subject to different program and market rules, such as mutually exclusive bid commitment requirements. We're not going to have the storage megawatts overcommitted in every ancillary service market. And Restore is capable of co-optimization of multiple technologies. We've modeled hybrid solar plus storage and wind plus storage. We've also done really interesting studies on kind of behind-the-meter storage and resources as we've been seeing more complicated value streams of, for example, small distribution-sided storage that may be interacting with retail rates or specific programs, as well as wholesale market streams. So Restore is really flexible and can be used for a wide range of applications and well suited to thinking about kind of the wholesale front of the meter market value for storage as well. So some information on the core storage related inputs for Restore is that we model the power in megawatts of the asset, the energy in megawatt hours, the cycling limits, especially related to important warranty considerations, the charge and discharge efficiency, parasitic losses, and then any inverter and interconnection limits, if applicable. Not only do we model these, but we've also thought about, how to design analyses to help inform what are the optimal sizes or durations or inverter limits between solar and storage for different assets. And all of these kind of storage technical inputs can be changed on an annual basis to reflect degradation or specific warranty requirements and changes over time. So this is kind of the technical storage inputs. In terms of our actual approach of like, okay, we have, different storage inputs, we have price forecasts. How do you actually build up a real expectation of storage revenues? That's where our overarching methodology comes in.
Before we get into this, Emily, it might be helpful for folks also just to take a brief step back and talk about how we think about co-location of resources, which is also very common and very much how many batteries are being developed in California in the near term in terms of what Restore looks at and how Restore considers that co-optimization problem, as well as the kinds of behind the meter structures that we have used Restore to model.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've looked at co-located assets, which are assets that are often physically close together, solar plus storage assets that are physically close together, but not linked. We've also looked at truly hybrid assets where we consider the behavior of solar and storage to be closely managed and AC or DC coupled. And we've thought carefully, in particular, about how these assets should behave relative to REC prices and their nodal price forecasts. So really, when should storage be charging from solar versus low grid prices? How does this change if either of them have certain contracts in place? And as Nate mentioned, how does this change if it's, front of the meter versus behind the meter? So particularly with behind the meter, we've looked at some really interesting use cases for distribution sited storage, for example, with charging limitations imposed by the utility. We've also looked at storage being sited at large load centers, such as industrial or DC fast charging sites. And yeah, Restore is very flexible and can kind of evaluate these different constraints from a wide lens. Great. And so kind of building up to our approach to actual revenue forecasting. As we talked about earlier, price forecasts are uncertain, right? Fundamentals are changing very rapidly. So we've developed this methodology kind of based on different operational cases to produce final revenues based on our experience and expertise. So let me walk you through this. The first cases we run in Restore are the top two, which are the day-ahead energy-only case, which is an optimization on the hourly day-ahead energy prices with the storage technical parameters we discussed. And then on the right-hand side, we run a co-optimization between day-ahead energy and AS. And we run both of these with perfect foresight because we think it's reasonable to capture this level of hourly revenues. And then our next step is to layer on incremental real-time revenues. And the way we do this is we take the behavior and dispatch from both of these kind of fundamental cases, and we evaluate when the battery is discharging. We look at the real-time hourly average price compared to the day-ahead price. And if the real-time hourly average price was higher than the day-ahead price in a battery discharge hour, we assume the battery was able to capture that higher real-time hourly average price. And that's how we add in some incremental real-time revenue without running kind of a separate full 5-minute intra-hourly co-optimized real-time revenue in 2045 kind of thing. To present plainly, we kind of layer on real-time revenues in this DART process where we accept the fundamental day-ahead dispatch, and then we layer in real-time revenues when there was an incremental real-time price capture in a discharge hour. Next, that leaves us with our case number 1, which is the DART energy only case, which incorporates day-ahead and real-time revenues. And then number 2, which is the DART energy plus AS case, which has day-ahead real-time and AS revenues. And maybe folks would just think case number 2 is where we could quit, right? It has each market that we want. It incorporates AS price saturation over time. But really what we need to think about is not only AS price saturation, but physical oversupply. And so this is where our AS market clearance rate blending happens, where we kind of account for the physical oversupply of the AS market by creating a percentage rate of battery build over the AS need in the market, to basically kind of decrease AS revenues over time in a way that reflects the ability of the average battery to capture AS revenues. This is assuming that the typical battery provides its proportional share of AS versus all of the other batteries bidding into AS markets as well, because all batteries can't provide AS in every hour, right? So we take the weighted average between case number 1 and case number 2 to produce our final case number 3, which is what we call our DART energy plus AS blended case, i.e. our E3 base case revenues.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I wonder if we spend a minute here. It's sort of a lot going on in our framework. It's a bit of a dynamic discussion. And certainly if folks have questions, we can kind of come back to this approach. But in general, taking a giant step back, right? You've shared with us that there's a range of battery performance observed in the market based on a range of operations and bidding strategies to achieve said operations, as well as specific contracts layered on top of certain assets. And that can also affect what the optimal choice of market participation is, right? Just on the front of meter market, we haven't even talked about those variations in the behind the meter market. So I'm trying to put together an expected value of revenue capture here. Really, this approach, what we do, as you've described to us, is we take each of these potential operating strategies in the same fundamental price forecast and run restore to generate that outlook, and then essentially blend them together to capture an expected version of that outlook if the chance of being dispatched in a co-optimized energy and AS against energy only is this number per year, which we estimate based on the participating batteries bidding into energy and AS co-optimized against the size of the AS market to kind of determine that blended rate. And then kind of heading back to your DART question, I imagine we may circle back to this later in the presentation as well in discussion. Certainly this approach, right, is designed to capture achievable, expected, incremental real-time revenues. So it is, by thinking of this as an hourly average, during the window that you would discharge anyway, essentially bidding between the day-ahead energy markets or real-time markets when real-time is higher, we're capturing what we think is a pretty achievable, uplift. But as you already covered earlier, what we see is that, in fact, the incremental value of perfect sub-hourly optimization in historical prices is getting closer and closer to the day-ahead energy-only value as well, as more batteries enter the system and as the real-time market is much smaller and these batteries have the ability to, as they're designed to do, bid down price spreads, capture volatility in their operations. And so, we've designed this forecast methodology to capture the window of various outcomes. And we also see those converging in our own internal forecast over time.
Great, thanks, Nate. So yeah.
Yes, a quick question that just came in is what's the source of our day-ahead and real-time price forecasts? We run our own price forecast module using Plexus capacity expansion and production cost simulation to simulate the Western interconnection, including PISO. So we produce our own price forecasts that are available and updated regularly each year.
Great, thanks. So this methodology is great, but how have we done in the past? This is one of my favorite slides to talk about because not all forecasters will share this with you, right? But this is an E3 Restore backcast where we took actual historical prices and modeled how Restore would have performed versus actual asset data from the Pomona battery in California, which publishes public revenues. So you can see between 2018 and 2023, overall, the E3 and the historical estimates are very close on a total revenue basis. We're really excited to see this and proud of our methodology and how it was able to hold up in a number of different conditions and years. You can see that what does vary a bit is the proportion of revenues. We forecasted a higher proportion of regulation revenues, whereas the asset actually ended up earning a higher proportion of energy revenues. And this has to do with kind of the specific asset bidding strategy, which isn't specifically incorporated into Restore, nor should a developer follow based on our results, but kind of represents that we can get the total benchmark correct and the opportunity cost will vary. And the biggest difference we had was in 2022, which we noted was a really unique year and where the asset was able to do better than our model, which is good for them. In addition to the backcasts, we really wanted to share kind of, what does our future forecast look like? We've talked about recent trends, but how does this methodology apply to future years? So we have provided our CAISO NP15 4-hour storage annual revenue forecast snapshots for 2025, 2035, and 2045, and dollars per kilowatt year. We broke it down into energy revenues, which include day ahead and real time. The different AS products are in blues and greens, and then capacity revenues in the light gray. So as we discussed in the methodology, the AS clearance rate that we calculated for 2025 is 23%, which kind of represents that physical oversupply value. So we would expect AS revenues to kind of, the DART plus AS case to be derated to 23% and have the DART energy only case be blended in for the remaining 77%. And over time, this clearance rate decreases as more batteries are built, right? So in 2035, we calculate that the clearance rate decreases to 16%, and in 2045, 10%. And you can see the impact of this, on the revenues. AS revenues are small to begin with in 2025, but over time they become, extremely minimal. And in terms of capacity revenues, we have our capacity prices provided. Near term, we expect capacity prices to remain high to reflect, major reliability needs in California, but over time kind of fall and stabilize. And then our ELCC, which is effective load carrying capability, is a capacity accreditation, which represents the ability of a generic resource, in this case 4-hour storage, to be able to provide reliability needs under the California Resource Adequacy Program, or RA program. So in 2025, the ELCC for 4-hour storage is 90%, which is high, but as more storage is built on the system, this ELCC drops significantly to 40% in 2035 and 14% in 2045. You can really see the impact of this ELCC as well as the price decrease on capacity revenues in the top chart in light gray.
Yeah, thanks for the overview, Emily. I'll chime in a little bit here. So maybe preempting a few questions that might be sitting around out there in the audience. So these are our projected revenue stacks for a generic 4-hour lithium-ion battery asset in Northern California, the NP15 zone, from our 2023 edition market price forecast for CAISO. That forecast includes hourly energy and AS prices, as well as capacity prices, ELCC projections, and the AS clearance rates that are included here. We're currently in the midst of updating that market price forecast to release a 2024 edition, and we're targeting late August for that release. So we will have kind of updated reviews on the market following from this as our previous case that was released out there. A couple other kind of takeaway points to note. is that this is for a single 4-hour asset, hence the capacity price in dollar per kilowatt month of net qualifying capacity, looking quite different from a revenue capture perspective. If you multiply that by this marginal ELCC expectation for 4 hours over time. So while the price we project for capacity is still moderately high in 2045 from our RA outlook, the portion of that turns into revenue from this ELCC for a 4-hour battery is a much smaller actual revenue capture from that market. And that's consistent with how we see the role of 4-hour batteries evolving into the future in the outlook. And a couple other quick points to note. Our 2025 energy and AS revenue, you'll note, is below our 2035 revenue. And in part, that is the effect of all of the battery storage being added to the market for the midterm reliability procurement that actually decreases some of the arbitrage opportunities as you are adding a lot more assets that are trying to squeeze down differences between lows and highs in their daily dispatch. Whereas by 2035, we have relatively more solar on the state's march towards decarbonization relative to storage again, and that helps to bring back up the energy arbitrage opportunity before we hit sort of that longer run equilibrium at the end of the forecast of the balance between solar and storage and wind and other resources in the system over time.
That's right. Great. Thanks, Nate. So our last content slide is busy, so I'll walk through it in detail, but it's another slide that is great to ask your forecaster to show you. We're proud of our consistency here, but on the right-hand side in the charts, what we're showing is the CAISO SP15 8-hour best forecast based on our market prices and restore methodology for 2030 in the top chart and 2035 in the bottom chart. And what we're showing in each different stack is our forecast vintage. So what did we forecast revenues to be in 2030 in 2021 versus 2022 versus today in 2024? So you can see we forecasted lower revenues in 2021 before a number of major changes and kind of input shock happened in 2022 that we've talked about throughout the presentation. Revenues increased and then also remained high, largely due to an increased portion of capacity and RA revenues that we expect to be a significant driver of 8-hour storage value instead of, AS, of course, and the energy arbitrage market. So our forecast has remained pretty consistent for the past 3 years, which is cool to see, and has reflected kind of major market dynamics and changes motivated by the California Midterm Reliability Order, the MTR, and also changes in battery costs. Great. And I'll wrap up with some key takeaways from today, and Nate and Kush, feel free to chime in. But kind of overall, wanted to zoom out and say that, the CAISO energy system, both supply and demand, are really rapidly evolving. And this motivates the need for fundamentals-based price and revenue forecasting. And our price forecasting and E3 restore storage revenue forecasting methodology are very flexible and anchor to these fundamentals. Battery storage market value for capacity, energy, and ancillary service is also changing based on these changing fundamentals, and it varies really widely by asset due to different price dynamics, operational and contractual strategies, and performance, which necessitates the need for a flexible model like Restore and a very flushed out storage revenue forecasting methodology like the approach we've described today. And this is especially important as more batteries undergo project financing so that we have reasonable and trustworthy revenue forecasts underwriting projects actually getting built in our state, that these are aligned with market conditions and trends so that we can have a great electricity grid to come. So thanks for listening, and happy to open it up to Nate and Kush for any additions and also our Q&A section.
Thanks a lot, Emily. We've had a few questions filtering in here that we're working to answer, and some of them we've taken at the same time, as we've been talking. One recent one that might be worth just a short talk on is the role of ELCC in capacity revenues. And I'll give a very kind of quick version of this. I know everyone is focused on California and tracking very closely what's happening with the official RA program in terms of the move towards a slice of day resource accreditation, which is a little bit different from the marginal ELCC projections that we include in our market price forecasts. So I'll just say a brief word about that without going into an entire RA forecast pitch around our RA market views and how we come up with those for this audience. In short, our view of the contribution of batteries to reliability of the system, marginal ELCC, is informed by the resource planning modeling and public ELCC estimates that are from that model, which is resolved capacity expansion for the state of California. That provides a good fundamental view of the reliability contribution of 4-hour storage incrementally over time based on the feedback effects of the changing system portfolio over time. So we think that's a good North Star, in short, for the value of batteries to the system as a whole. Now, in brief, the slice of day RA framework that is adopted and moving forward in the next compliance years is somewhat following that same North Star conceptually, but is going to result in differentiated capacity values for different LSEs based on different LSEs' specific resource portfolios as they're evaluated in the resource adequacy showing tool that all LSEs need to file with the CPUC. So the short version of that answer then is that we think that ELCC is still a fundamentally good long-run benchmark of battery value to the system, but that needs to be considered much more differentially depending on which kind of an off-taker you're talking to and what their portfolio looks like under the slice of day framework. Let's see, looking through any of the other questions that we've received so far that we didn't quite have enough time to cover. I know one of them earlier that we touched on a little bit, Emily, was around the kind of behind the meter versions that we've been thinking about. And I wonder if you could also just talk a bit about some of the use cases that we've evaluated with Restore. And I'm happy to chime in myself as well. And maybe specifically what we've done with EVs and V2G and V1G using Restore.
Yeah, happy to. So we have evaluated a lot of different use cases behind the meter with Restore. It's capable of modeling kind of rooftop solar, customer load, and storage systems, as well as different smart technologies like smart water heaters or HVAC. We've done behind the meter applications for residential customers, as well as different kind of commercial buildings, such as office buildings, and then also industrial customers. We've also looked at microgrids, which I guess are, I don't know, technically behind the meter or not. And particularly, some of the work I'm really passionate about is our modeling of electric vehicles in Restore. We have evaluated how EVs can interact with behind the meter solar and storage in terms of the value of managing charging, so kind of shifting EV charging outside of high-priced retail rate hours when the grid is stressed. And then also the value of the potential for the EV to discharge back to meet home load, to see basically to provide value against the retail rate, but also when the grid may be having an outage, what that resiliency value could look like to different customers, including residential customers all the way to kind of different customers who may have like a commercial fleet, and what that value looks like.
Awesome. No, thanks for the overview. It looks like we've done a decent job, I think, at answering the questions. Thanks again for taking us through the work that we've been doing. I guess I'll give this opportunity in closing us out here that number one, we've applied Restore vigorously to transaction and planning and resource evaluation support processes many times and kind of constantly in the market. And we feel it's a robust tool that can help to answer a lot of the evolving questions that exist around battery and other storage-like resources in the market. And of course, our upcoming CAISO market price forecast update is we are set to release the end of August, and that's our plan. That'll include, a refresh on capacity prices, ELCC expectations, RECs, hourly energy prices by zone, and hourly AS prices as well. And of course, we'll have new updated storage outlooks using Restore off of those prices shortly thereafter. So that late August, early September is the expectation. And I guess everything else, I would want to invite anyone who's got any follow-up questions to email any one of us here on the screen. Feel free to reach out. And then I also want to thank CISA again for inviting us to talk with you all. I think with that, we'll go ahead and close up. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you.